More than 31,000 Russian troops vanished from the battlefield in October alone, while Ukrainian forces shredded 93 tanks and over 230 armored fighting vehicles in a brutal month of clashes that left experts stunned. A massive Russian mechanized assault thunders toward Ukrainian lines, with T-90 tanks and BMP infantry carriers charging in perfect sync, backed by roaring artillery and shrouded in thick smoke screens designed to dodge deadly drones and missile strikes. It looked like a classic victory in the making, the kind of overwhelming push that could crack defenses wide open and shift the war's momentum overnight. But hold on, things flipped fast into pure chaos. What started as a powerhouse advance crumbled into a deadly trap, where cheap FPV drones swarmed from the skies, anti-tank mines lurked underfoot, and pinpoint artillery rained down in deadly harmony. Russian crews bailed from burning wrecks, columns stalled in explosions, and the whole operation turned from triumph to total disaster. This isn't your average skirmish caught on grainy footage. It's a game-changer exposing how old-school tank rushes are getting crushed by smart, low-cost tech in modern combat. Imagine the shockwaves. If brute force tanks can't break through anymore, what does that mean for future wars? Could this spell the end for traditional armored assaults, forcing armies worldwide to rethink everything from doctrine to budgets? Stick around, because the details from the front lines reveal a turning point that might redefine warfare for decades. And you won't believe how Ukraine pulled it off against the odds. Russian forces launched a bold mechanized assault, relying on classic tactics to punch through Ukrainian defenses with a mix of heavy armor and infantry support. Columns of T-90 tanks rumbled forward alongside BMP vehicles loaded with troops, and commanders ordered the release of dense smoke clouds that spread across the battlefield, blocking views from overhead surveillance and handheld missile launchers. This veil aimed to give the attackers a short window to close in without drawing immediate fire, yet it also limited their own sight lines in the process. Crews inside the tanks scanned for threats through narrow periscopes, while infantry prepared to dismount and secure ground once the line broke. The landscape played a key role in shaping the push, offering straight paths flanked by rows of trees that guided vehicles like natural highways. Russian planners counted on this setup to funnel their strength directly at weak spots, and the vehicles accelerated in formation, engines roaring as they aimed to overrun positions before reinforcements could arrive. Dust kicked up from treads mixed with the smoke, creating a hazy barrier that seemed impenetrable at ground level. T-90s led with their thick frontal plating and rapid cannons ready to suppress dug-in soldiers, and BMPs followed closely to drop fighters who would fan out and hold captured areas. Artillery pieces trailed the main group, positioned to lob shells over the advance and soften targets ahead, building a layered offense meant to overwhelm through sheer persistence. Yet Ukrainian reconnaissance units had gained the upper hand long before the clash intensified, deploying small unmanned aircraft that hovered at safe heights to monitor every shift below. These devices captured live feeds of the forming columns, relaying data back to operators who plotted responses in real time. As the smoke thickened, the drones pierced through with thermal sensors, picking out heat signatures from engines and personnel that ground forces might miss. This early detection shifted the dynamic, turning what Russians saw as a surprise strike into a telegraphed move that defenders could counter step by step. The assault gained speed as vehicles navigated the tree-lined corridors, with T-90 crews adjusting turrets to scan for ambush points, while BMP drivers maintained tight spacing to avoid gaps. Smoke generators continued pumping out cover, drifting low to obscure infrared sights on enemy weapons like javelins, which relied on clear locks for accuracy. Russian tactics emphasized momentum here, pushing units to cover ground fast and force Ukrainians into reactive mode rather than planned strikes. Infantry inside the carriers gripped rifles, ready for close-quarters fights once the armor cleared paths, and the whole formation pulsed with coordinated energy aimed at breaking the front. Despite the careful setup, the terrain's openness worked against secrecy, making drone tracking effortless as units followed obvious lanes between wooded strips. Planners assumed that firepower from cannons and mounted guns would scatter any spotters, but the high-flying observers stayed out of range, feeding intel that eroded the element of surprise. This mismatch highlighted how old armored strategies clashed with new realities, where visibility from afar could unravel even the most organized advances. As the column neared contact zones, tension built among the ranks, with leaders urging faster progress to capitalize on the smoke's temporary shield. Ukrainian defenders struck back with precision weapons, turning the Russian advance into a chaotic halt through coordinated missile and shell fire. A portable javelin launcher locked onto the front tank in the column, sending a guided projectile straight at its upper section, and the impact pierced the metal plating with explosive force. Crew members scrambled out through hatches amid rising flames, leaving the machine immobile on the dirt path, and they dashed toward nearby carriers for cover. This initial blow disrupted the formation's rhythm, forcing trailing units to slow down as smoke still lingered around them. Operators on the Ukrainian side had positioned themselves in hidden spots, using infrared sights to cut through the haze and pick targets with care. Artillery units joined the fray moments later, zeroing in on the disabled armor to prevent any salvage attempts by the attackers. An M777 howitzer crew adjusted their aim based on quick spotter reports, firing high explosive rounds that slammed into the stranded hull, and the blasts ripped apart key components like tracks and engines. Shells detonated on contact, scattering debris across the field, and the strike ensured no quick repairs could get the vehicle moving again. Ukrainian commanders prioritized these follow-up hits to exploit the momentary vulnerability, keeping pressure on the enemy without exposing their own positions. The cannon's long reach allowed safe distance, blending mobility with deadly accuracy against static threats. Drones played a crucial part in guiding these responses, feeding live data that slashed reaction times to mere seconds. Small unmanned vehicles circled overhead, capturing video of the damaged tank and relaying coordinates straight to fire control teams, and this setup bridged the gap between detection and destruction. Sensors on the aircraft picked up heat trails from the wreckage, pinpointing exact locations even as dust settled, and operators back at base directed adjustments in real time. Defenders used this edge to maintain initiative, turning aerial views into tactical advantages over ground-bound foes. The attackers' brief stop under their own fog amplified the harm, as combined missile and gun barrages caught multiple elements off guard. Smoke meant to shield the group now trapped them in place, limiting evasion while Ukrainian teams synchronized their efforts for overlapping strikes. Javelins handled close-range threats with top-down attacks that bypassed heavy frontal guards, and artillery covered wider zones with area-denying blasts. This teamwork maximized chaos among the Russians, with abandoned gear drawing more fire and pulling resources away from the push. Crews faced tough choices between retrieving assets or pressing ahead, often leading to further exposure under the relentless assault. As the counteroffensive unfolded, Ukrainian forces adapted their positions to sustain the momentum, shifting spotters to new vantage points while keeping drones aloft for constant updates. The Javelin hit had set off a chain reaction, drawing in M777 volleys that hammered the line, and the rapid data flow from UAVs ensured no target escaped notice. Defenders focused on isolating sections of the column, using the pause to layer their defenses deeper into the engagement zone. Russian attempts to regroup met with immediate responses, as the coordinated system left little room for recovery amid the growing wreckage. This phase highlighted how integrated tools could dismantle a strong offensive, with missiles striking vital points and shells finishing the job. Ukrainian forces unleashed a swarm of aerial strikes, deploying FPV and vampire-style drones to target damaged Russian armor and turn smoldering wrecks into total losses. These unmanned aircraft dove toward burning tanks and BMPs scattered across the field, dropping payloads that ignited stored munitions inside the hulls, and the resulting blasts sent shockwaves through the air. Operators guided the machines with first-person views from onboard cameras, adjusting paths mid-flight to hit weak spots like open hatches or fuel lines. Defenders timed these interventions to coincide with enemy pauses, maximizing disruption without risking ground troops. Video captures from the drones revealed the sheer destruction, with chassis splitting open and fragments soaring far into the distance as secondary detonations ripped vehicles apart. Crews nearby felt the psychological toll deepen, hearing the buzz of approaching threats that eroded confidence in their protective gear, and many hesitated before attempting rescues. The explosions not only neutralized the machines but also scattered hazards like shrapnel across retreat paths, complicating any efforts to regroup. Ukrainian pilots maneuvered the devices through tight spaces between debris, ensuring each strike built on the previous damage to prevent partial recoveries. This visual record underscored how remote control amplified the impact, turning isolated hits into cascading failures that demoralized advancing units. As Russian elements began pulling back or trying to tow crippled assets, Ukrainian drones extended their reach to hit supply trucks and additional armored carriers in the mix. These follow-up assaults caught vehicles during vulnerable moments, such as when hooks attached to drag away broken tanks, and the precision dives pierced thin roofs to disable engines or ignite cargo. Logistics lines suffered quick breakdowns, leaving fuel and ammo exposed without quick fixes, and defenders pressed the advantage by chaining multiple sorties. Operators switched between FPV units for speed and vampire models for heavier bombs, coordinating via shared feeds to cover wide areas. This denial strategy locked the attackers out of reclaiming hardware, shifting the momentum further toward containment rather than mere delay. The aerial counterpunch grew in intensity as more drones joined the fray, focusing on clusters where Russians attempted hasty repairs under fire. Vampire variants hovered briefly to assess targets before unleashing explosives that burrowed into compromised sections, and the chain reactions often engulfed nearby support gear in flames. Mental strain mounted on the ground, with soldiers witnessing comrades abandon posts amid the unrelenting overhead assault, eroding unit cohesion. Ukrainian controllers maintained altitude to avoid anti-air threats, weaving through the landscape to strike from unexpected angles. In the thick of the engagement, FPV models excelled at close-quarters finishes, slamming into BMPs, already weakened by prior blasts and triggering fuel-fed infernos that consumed interiors. Debris from these events littered the zone, creating natural barriers that slowed enemy maneuvers, and the psychological weight pressed harder as survivors radioed for aid. Bomber types complemented this by carpet dropping over groups attempting to salvage, ensuring no vehicle escaped unscathed. Defenders rotated fleets to sustain the barrage, adapting speeds to match retreating paces and keep pressure constant. The pattern of intervention unfolded methodically, with drones swooping after initial stops to exploit vulnerabilities like exposed ammo racks. Footage illustrated hulls buckling under impacts, propelling parts skyward in arcs that intimidated onlookers, and the cumulative effect shattered morale across the line. Several armored pieces fell during these phases, hit while crews worked on field fixes, denying any material gains. Ukrainian teams fine-tuned approaches based on real-time visuals, blending FPV agility with vampire payload strength for comprehensive coverage. Russian forces fired back with heavy gun barrages, aiming to pin down Ukrainian spots and open routes for foot soldiers and remaining armored units. Cannons positioned behind the line unleashed volleys of shells that exploded near defender trenches, shaking the ground and forcing heads low, while spotters adjusted ranges to hit key strongholds. This counterfire sought to regain control, allowing infantry squads to move up under the blast's cover and link with vehicles for a renewed thrust. Commanders radioed orders to intensify the salvos, coordinating bursts to create gaps in the opposition's setup. Troops advanced cautiously, weaving between craters as the artillery provided temporary shields from return shots. Before the full push could resume, a leading BMP rolled over a buried anti-tank device, detonating with a massive roar that lifted the chassis and scattered parts across the path. The blast created an instant gap in the lineup, stopping the flow of following machines and exposing the group to open views. Crew survivors staggered away from the mangled frame, seeking shelter in nearby ditches, while the explosion's force damaged nearby tracks and halted the entire section. Russian leaders assessed the damage quickly, but the sudden break disrupted their timing, leaving units bunched up and prone to focused attacks. This incident near Volodymyrivka turned a coordinated effort into a vulnerable cluster, as the mine's placement exploited the predictable advance lanes. Ukrainian teams responded right away with accurate hits, deploying guided weapons to exploit the confusion and isolate stranded elements one by one. Laser-guided rounds zeroed in on exposed flanks, striking hulls with piercing force that disabled mobility systems, and defenders shifted fire to prevent clustering. Drones re-entered the scene at this point, circling low to drop charges on separated targets, while howitzers followed with adjusted barrages that pounded the split groups. Operators synchronized these efforts through shared intel, ensuring each wave built on the last to widen the fractures. Foot patrols on the Ukrainian side held firm, using the disruption to reposition and cover arcs without advancing prematurely. The outcome saw the tight offensive structure shatter into scattered pieces, making it easy for opponents to target and dismantle. Fragments of the column now sat idle in open fields, drawing concentrated volleys that ignited fuel tanks and forced evacuations, and the slowed pace allowed systematic takedowns. Russian attempts to reform met with overlapping strikes, as drones buzzed overhead to hit repair crews and artillery shelled assembly points. Defenders capitalized on the spread, rotating assets to maintain steady pressure and prevent any regrouping surges. As the engagement dragged on, Russian infantry tried pushing through the breach, but the fragmented setup left them exposed without vehicle backing. Shells continued raining from Ukrainian batteries, cratering approach routes and pinning squads in place, while aerial units picked off stragglers attempting flanks. The mine's trigger had cascading effects, forcing diversions that stretched lines thin and invited pinpoint countermeasures. Ukrainian controllers monitored the chaos via overhead feeds, directing resources to high-value spots like command carriers. The breakdown intensified as isolated machines became prime marks, with precision tools exploiting gaps to deliver final blows. Drones dove on lone BMPs, embedding explosives that triggered internal chain reactions, and artillery crews fine-tuned elevations for maximum spread. Russian responses grew disjointed, with units retreating piecemeal under the relentless pace, losing cohesion amid the widening disarray. Defenders maintained discipline, conserving ammo for critical moments and ensuring the splintered force could not coalesce. Russian troops started pulling back from the front, scattering abandoned machines, injured fighters, and gear across the scarred landscape in total confusion. Commanders issued hurried orders to withdraw, directing surviving units to reverse along battered trails, and soldiers grabbed what they could while dodging fresh hazards from the fight. Vehicles revved engines in reverse, towing some damaged pieces but leaving others exposed to the elements, and the hasty exit created bottlenecks where groups clumped together. Ukrainian scouts noted this shift quickly, relaying positions to maintain oversight as the enemy tried to disengage. Drones from the Ukrainian side pursued the fleeing paths, locking onto moving targets like transport trucks and medical vans that carried the herd away. These aircraft followed at varying heights, using cameras to spot convoys snaking through fields or roads, and operators triggered dives to release charges on roofs or sides. Strikes hit engines mid-motion, forcing stops that stranded personnel in open areas, and the relentless chase extended into hidden spots like dugouts or structures where squads sought refuge. Pilots adjusted for wind and speed, ensuring impacts disrupted evacuation efforts and sowed panic among the ranks. Artillery batteries kept up their assaults throughout the fallback, lobbing rounds at clusters to heighten the toll and scramble plans. Gun crews recalibrated based on drone intel, sending projectiles arcing over to explode near assembly points or slow-moving lines, and the blasts cratered escape avenues while wounding stragglers. Shells detonated in sequences, covering wide swaths to prevent organized pulls, and defenders timed fusillades to coincide with bottlenecks for maximum effect. This ongoing bombardment transformed a simple withdrawal into a punishing ordeal, draining resources and morale as Russians navigated under constant threat. Operators maintained fire discipline, conserving stocks for high-impact moments that pinned foes in place. The whole mission concluded as a complete failure for the attackers, serving instead as a prime model of how stacked defenses wear down aggressors through steady erosion. Layered approaches combined ground obstacles with air dominance and ranged hits, ensuring no phase went unchallenged, and this setup flipped the script from offensive breakthrough to exhaustive drain. Russian planners faced the harsh reality of depleted assets, with over 80% of committed armor lost in the fray at a price exceeding $60 million. Ukrainian tactics shown here, blending tools to extract every possible advantage and secure the zone without overextending. As the dust settled, retreating forces fragmented even more, with isolated pockets calling for aid that never arrived in time. Drones circled persistently, picking off lone runners hiding in drainage pipes or ruined walls, and artillery adjusted to blanket those areas with suppressive bursts. The disorganized flight cost dearly in men and materiel, leaving trails of smoke from hit ambulances that highlighted the human price. Defenders pressed the pursuit judiciously, rotating units to sustain coverage and block any counter-rallies. This final hunt cemented the rout, where initial ambitions dissolved into survival scrambles under unyielding pressure. The operation's close revealed deep flaws in the assault design, as layered countermeasures turned momentum against the initiators. Ukrainian persistence during the exit phase ensured lasting impacts, with strikes on hideouts forcing full abandonment and scattering remnants far. Artillery's role in the tail end kept the pace frantic, shelling paths to delay reinforcements and deepen the setback. In this wrap-up, the battle exemplified attrition's power, where coordinated layers not only held but actively dismantled the threat, reshaping the front for future holds. What do you think? Have cheap drones truly reshaped modern warfare? Or is this just a passing phase before Russia tweaks its playbook? The battlefield just delivered a brutal truth. Numbers no longer guarantee victory. What wins now is speed, coordination, and reaction time, not how many tanks can roll in formation. Russia entered this fight with the old formula: tanks, BMPs, and artillery working in sync, but ended up watching its own armored spearhead burn in open fields. Ukraine flipped the script, turning defense into destruction through drones, precision sensors, and real-time targeting that left no room for recovery. This wasn't just a single clash. It was a warning that in modern war, metal and manpower are useless without data and timing. Cheap drones now outthink multi-million-dollar machines, and algorithms decide who survives the next minute. If this trend continues, the battlefield may soon belong to whoever controls the sky's invisible network, not the ground's heaviest guns. So here's the question. Will Moscow abandon its traditional doctrine and embrace asymmetric warfare, or will it keep throwing mass into the grinder until exhaustion sets in? And beyond that, are we witnessing the future template of global conflict, where drones and sensors replace armor as the true symbol of power? Like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more frontline reports and deep analysis from the world's most intense battlefields.